I thought she was just my friend's mom, until the way she looked at me made everything I thought I knew about desire change. The day had started like any other, a quiet Saturday afternoon when I found myself at my friend Jake's house. I'd been over plenty of times before, but today something felt different. Maybe it was the way the sunlight slanted through the living room windows, casting golden streaks across the furniture, or maybe it was her, Jake's mom. I'd seen her before, of course. She was always polite, always smiling, the kind of woman who radiated confidence without trying too hard. But today, I noticed details I hadn't before. The gentle way she moved around the kitchen, the subtle elegance in her posture, the warmth in her smile as she glanced my way. She caught me staring, and instead of embarrassment, she simply gave a small, knowing smile. "Hey," she said softly, her voice carrying a gentle warmth that made my chest tighten slightly. "You're staying for lunch, right?" I nodded, my voice catching more than I expected. "Yeah, sure." As she set down a plate of food, her hand brushed mine for the briefest moment. It was fleeting, but it left a strange, pleasant warmth lingering in my fingers. I quickly looked away, pretending to focus on the food, but the memory of that touch stayed with me. There was something about the way she carried herself, a quiet elegance paired with a subtle playfulness in her eyes, that made it impossible to see her as just my friend's mom. We talked while cooking, the conversation light at first, recipes, the weather, casual updates. But I found myself paying attention to every small gesture. The way she tilted her head when she laughed, the soft cadence of her voice as she told a story about her day, the way her hand occasionally grazed the counter, almost brushing mine by accident. Every detail felt magnified, charged with an unspoken energy I wasn't sure how to interpret. At one point, she reached over to stir a pot on the stove, and I caught a whiff of her perfume, warm, floral, with a hint of something I couldn't name. My stomach fluttered in a way I hadn't expected. I caught myself staring again, but she met my gaze with a smile that was just shy enough to feel intimate without saying anything outright. It wasn't just attraction, it was fascination. There was a calm confidence in her movements, a quiet charm that made every ordinary moment feel extraordinary. And somehow, amid the clatter of pans and the hum of the kitchen, I felt like we were the only two people in the room. By the time lunch was ready, I was acutely aware of how close I was sitting to her at the table. The sunlight catching her hair, the gentle warmth radiating from her presence, and that knowing smile she gave me again, all of it settled into my mind like a quiet, persistent melody. I didn't understand what it meant yet, but I knew that today had changed something. Something subtle, something electric, something that promised that this ordinary afternoon might be anything but ordinary. After that first afternoon, I couldn't stop noticing her. Every visit to Jake's house felt different now, like the space between us was charged in a way I hadn't anticipated. It started with small moments, innocuous on the surface but electric when examined closely. Helping her carry groceries from the car, reaching for the same jar of pasta sauce, our hands brushing lightly, lingering just long enough to make my pulse quicken. She didn't seem to notice, or maybe she did, and chose to let it pass. There was a delicate dance in every interaction, subtle, unspoken. When we walked through the garden together, she leaned slightly closer than necessary to examine the flowers, and I felt the warmth radiating from her shoulder. The air smelled faintly of earth and blooming jasmine, and I could almost hear the quiet rhythm of her breathing alongside mine. Her laughter became a soundtrack I was acutely aware of. One afternoon, she recounted a story about a minor kitchen disaster, a sauce gone wrong, and her soft chuckle made my chest tighten. I caught myself staring at the way her lips curved, the way her eyes crinkled at the corners. There was an elegance in her movements, a gentle grace that felt almost hypnotic. I began noticing the little vulnerabilities too. When she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, her fingers lingered for a moment, brushing against her cheek, and it made her seem human, approachable, even intimate. When she hesitated while choosing a spice from the shelf, her expression softened, a subtle pause that made me want to step closer, not to intrude, just to be near her. We started sharing small tasks together. Cooking became an unspoken ritual, chopping vegetables side by side, stirring pots simultaneously, handing each other utensils. Each touch was fleeting but meaningful. A hand brushing hers while passing the knife, our elbows accidentally touching as we reached for the same ingredient, simple gestures that carried a quiet weight. The kitchen felt warmer somehow, the air thick with unspoken tension, our proximity magnifying every heartbeat. There was also a comfort in silence. Sitting together on the couch after the dishes were done, either of us speaking, just enjoying the quiet. The subtle brush of her hand as she adjusted her posture, the soft rustle of her clothing, the way her presence filled the room. It was intoxicating. I realized that it wasn't just attraction. It was curiosity, fascination, a desire to understand her, to share space with her without rushing, without forcing anything. By the end of the day, I was acutely aware of the emotional tightrope we were walking. Every glance, every accidental touch, every shared laugh felt like a spark in the quiet tension that stretched between us. I didn't know where it would lead, but for the first time, I understood that the ordinary moments, helping, laughing, lingering near her, were what made this connection feel real. And in that subtle closeness, in the spaces between words and touches, I sensed the beginning. It was a quiet evening, the kind where the house felt suspended between the fading light outside and the gentle hum of lamps inside. Jake had gone out with friends, leaving me alone with her in the living room. The soft ticking of a clock and the occasional rustle of leaves outside filled the pauses between our conversation. Somehow, the room felt more intimate than usual, not because of anything we were doing, but because of the way we were simply there, together. She poured us both a cup of tea and handed me mine first. Our fingers brushed as she passed the mug, and a familiar warmth traveled up my arm. I tried to focus on the steam curling from the cup, the rich scent of chamomile, but my attention kept straying to the way her hand lingered in mine for a heartbeat longer than necessary. She smiled at me, small and almost shy, and I felt the subtle pull of something unspoken. "I don't know why I'm telling you this," she began, her voice softer now, carrying a trace of vulnerability I hadn't noticed before. "But sometimes I feel like I've missed my chance at certain things. Regrets, you know? Life moving faster than you can keep up with." I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I simply listened. I watched her as she spoke, noticing the slight tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes glanced downward, tracing the rim of her mug, and the faint quiver in her voice when she spoke of her loneliness. I wanted to say something reassuring, something that could bridge the invisible distance between us, but words felt inadequate. "You always know what to say," she added, a small laugh escaping her. It wasn't humorous. It was a fragile attempt to mask something heavier. "I mean, it's strange, talking to someone so much younger. You have this clarity. Freshness. You see things differently." I felt my chest tighten. Her words weren't flirtatious, at least not overtly, but the attention in her gaze, the way she lingered in my presence, made the air between us feel electric. I realized, in that moment, that she trusted me with parts of herself she probably didn't share with anyone else. Her hand brushed mine again, this time a deliberate touch as if testing the boundaries. It sent a shiver through me. "I think sometimes I forget what it feels like to just connect with someone," she admitted quietly, almost to herself. Her eyes met mine, and there was a vulnerability there that was both disarming and compelling. For a moment, I felt the world shrink to just the two of us in that softly lit room, our shared silence speaking more than words ever could. I wanted to reach for her hand, to offer comfort and closeness, but I held back, letting the moment breathe. Instead, I smiled gently, letting my presence speak for me, hoping she could feel the steadiness and sincerity of my heart through the quiet intimacy of the space. That evening, I realized that attraction wasn't just about longing. It was about trust, connection, and the unspoken acknowledgement of vulnerability. And in that soft, lingering conversation, a bridge began to form between us, delicate yet undeniable, promising that what was beginning could be something far more profound than either of us expected. The days that followed were a curious mixture of normalcy and heightened awareness. Being at Jake's house no longer felt like a casual visit. It was a carefully observed dance, each step weighted with meaning I hadn't noticed before. We fell into routines, small, seemingly ordinary routines that somehow carried an undercurrent of tension. One afternoon, we found ourselves in the garden, tending to her flower beds. She handed me a pair of gloves, our fingers brushing as I took them, and I felt that familiar warmth ripple through my chest. She smiled, lightly teasing me about my awkward grip, and I couldn't help but notice how her laughter seemed to settle around me like sunlight, soft and inviting. I tried to focus on the task at hand, but every brush of her shoulder against mine, every accidental touch, made my heart skip. It wasn't just physical closeness. It was the way she noticed the little things about me, the way my brow furrowed when concentrating, the subtle shift in my stance when I was unsure, the faint tension in my shoulders when I hesitated. And I noticed the little things about her, the quiet way she breathed through a challenging task, the curve of her smile when she caught me watching her, the gentle tilt of her head that invited conversation without forcing it. Inside the house, our proximity became more pronounced. While helping her prepare dinner, our arms brushed against each other repeatedly, sometimes accidentally, sometimes lingering just a moment too long. She leaned slightly closer as she handed me a knife, her scent, warm, subtle, and familiar, reaching me in a way that made my thoughts scatter. The way her eyes met mine, holding for a beat longer than comfortable, carried an unspoken question, an invitation, and a warning all at once. Even in the quietest moments, the tension was tangible. Sitting side by side on the couch after cleaning up, either of us speaking, our shoulders occasionally touching, I could feel the unspoken energy between us. It was heavy yet comforting, thrilling yet restrained. Every glance, every faint smile, every casual brush of our hands felt deliberate and electric, as if we were both aware of the line we weren't ready to cross but equally eager to explore. What fascinated me most was the comfort that existed alongside the tension. She had this ability to make the ordinary feel intimate, watching TV together, sharing a blanket on the sofa, laughing at a shared joke, and yet, beneath that comfort, there was a current of something more, something neither of us could quite name. Her presence was magnetic, not in a loud, obvious way, but in the quiet gravity of her attention, the subtle way she adjusted when I leaned too close, the way she let our hands almost meet when reaching for the same object. By the end of that evening, I realized that every small interaction had become a game of proximity and awareness. The tension was no longer accidental. It was a quiet dialogue, an intricate dance of gestures, glances, and touches. And through it all, I felt a deepening sense of connection, a growing understanding that what we shared wasn't fleeting curiosity. It was something tender, fragile, and incredibly real, waiting for the right moment to surface fully. It was one of those evenings when the world outside seemed to pause. The rain had started earlier, tapping a steady rhythm against the windows, turning the garden into a blur of wet leaves and muted light. Inside, the house was warm, cozy, and quiet, with only the soft hum of the heater and the occasional creak of the floorboards filling the space between us. Somehow, it felt like the world had shrunk, leaving just the two of us suspended in that intimate bubble. We were sitting together on the couch, a shared blanket draped over our laps. She adjusted it slightly, and her knee brushed mine. The touch was accidental, almost casual, but it sent a jolt of warmth through me. I noticed the faint scent of her perfume, warm and floral, mingling with the earthy smell of rain seeping through the slightly cracked window. The air between us was thick with something unspoken, something electric and fragile all at once. She leaned back against the couch, glancing at me with a small, contemplative smile. Her eyes were softer than usual, clouded with thought, yet they held a directness that made my stomach flutter. "You know," she said quietly, almost hesitantly, "I didn't expect this." She paused, tilting her head slightly. "You're harder to resist than I expected." The words hung in the air, delicate yet charged, carrying a weight neither of us had voiced before. I felt my breath catch, my heart thumping in my chest as I processed the confession. It wasn't overt or forward, but it was honest, unmistakably real. I could feel the tremor in her fingers as she rested her hand near mine on the blanket, the subtle tension in her posture betraying a mixture of hope and hesitation. I didn't reach for her hand immediately. Instead, I let the moment linger, letting my gaze meet hers fully. In her eyes, I saw vulnerability, desire, and a quiet acknowledgement of the complexity of what we were feeling. There was an unspoken understanding that neither of us could rush, that the world outside might not approve, but in that space, we didn't care. The rain provided a soft soundtrack, each droplet against the window amplifying the intimacy of the room. Finally, I let my hand brush hers, a gentle, deliberate touch. The warmth of her skin against mine felt like an anchor, grounding the swirl of emotions. Her fingers responded subtly, not grasping but not pulling away either, and the electricity between us hummed quietly, almost painfully, in its restraint. The moment wasn't about passion, it was about recognition, about the first tangible acknowledgement that what had been simmering quietly between us was real and mutual. We sat like that for a long while, hands brushing occasionally, shoulders touching lightly under the blanket, exchanging small smiles and lingering glances. The tension that had been building over weeks found release in that shared, quiet acknowledgement. It wasn't a rush towards something forbidden, it was the soft, deliberate admission that our connection, complex, delicate, and profoundly human, was finally being recognized. By the time the rain eased and the world outside softened into evening shadows, the room felt different. Something had shifted, something tender and unspoken had been embraced, leaving us both aware that the path ahead would be careful, but undeniably real. After that rainy evening, something unspoken lingered between us, like a delicate thread connecting our thoughts and gestures. Neither of us had crossed any line, yet every glance, every touch, carried a quiet weight. It wasn't urgency or recklessness, it was awareness, a careful exploration of closeness that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. We began spending more time together in small, deliberate ways. Sitting side by side while watching TV, our knees occasionally brushing, was enough to make the air thrum with quiet electricity. She laughed at a joke I hadn't intended to be funny, and I noticed the subtle curve of her smile, the way her eyes softened when she looked at me. I realized that I was watching her more than the show, memorizing her presence, the way her hair fell across her shoulders, the gentle rise and fall of her chest as she breathed. Our conversations became deeper, more personal. We talked about our dreams, our fears, the regrets that weighed lightly on our shoulders. She would tilt her head, listening intently, and I could see her hand brushing near mine or resting casually on the arm of the sofa, close enough that the warmth radiated through the fabric of my sleeve. These small touches were electric, yet comforting, an acknowledgement that our connection didn't need words to be felt. Hesitation hung in the spaces between us, and I could feel it mirrored in her. Sometimes, when I reached to hand her a cup of tea, our fingers met, and she would look away, cheeks faintly flushed, a quiet smile tugging at her lips. Other times, she would linger a little too close when we walked together through the garden, her shoulder brushing mine as if by accident, her presence a gentle warmth that made my chest tighten. Each gesture was a careful balance, a dance of awareness and restraint. There were moments when the world outside our bubble intruded, and we were reminded of the social boundaries we had to navigate. I would catch myself hesitating, wondering how much I could lean into her presence without overstepping. She seemed to sense my caution, offering reassurance through small, subtle gestures, a hand briefly resting on my arm, a reassuring glance, the gentle tilt of her head when she wanted me to speak freely. These moments built trust, a slow, deliberate intimacy that transcended mere attraction. Even ordinary tasks became shared experiences that deepened our bond. Cooking together, folding laundry side by side, or arranging flowers in the garden became rituals of connection. Each brush of hands, each shared laugh, each lingering glance reinforced the awareness of what was possible without forcing it. I realized that it wasn't just desire, it was the pleasure of being present with someone who understood and accepted the complex parts of me, just as I was beginning to understand and accept her. By the end of the week, our connection had evolved into something profound. The hesitation, far from being a barrier, became part of the intimacy itself, a mutual respect for boundaries paired with a growing comfort in shared closeness. In those quiet moments, I felt a deepening bond, a recognition that what we were building was slow, deliberate, and undeniably real. The story between us was no longer just tension and curiosity. It was trust, warmth, and the promise of something lasting, waiting patiently for the right moment to fully bloom. The weeks that followed felt like a quiet revelation. Our connection, carefully nurtured through gestures, glances, and shared moments, had grown into something steady, tangible, and deeply comforting. We both moved cautiously, aware of the boundaries, her as a mother and friend's parent, me as someone younger, but the hesitations no longer felt like obstacles. They had become part of the intimacy, part of the rhythm we shared. One evening, Jake was out with friends again, leaving the house unusually still. We sat together on the porch, wrapped in a soft blanket against the crisp night air. The garden was dimly lit by the glow of lanterns, rain from a recent shower clinging to leaves and petals, making the world around us glisten softly. She leaned slightly closer than necessary, her shoulder brushing mine, and the warmth of her presence made the chill in the air vanish. I noticed the way her hand rested near mine, fingers occasionally grazing against mine as if seeking reassurance, or perhaps offering it. I let my hand find hers, our fingers intertwining lightly, slowly, savoring the quiet intensity of the gesture. It wasn't urgent or demanding, it was deliberate, comforting, and entirely ours. The weight of unspoken feelings had transformed into shared warmth, each touch a quiet affirmation of what we felt but had never fully said. We talked softly, about small things at first, books we'd read, moments from our week, but the conversation gradually deepened, touching on hopes and fears, on the strange and beautiful way our lives had intersected. Her voice, calm and steady, carried a softness that made me feel understood in ways I hadn't realized I craved. And I could sense her noticing the same in me, an awareness that our connection had grown beyond curiosity or fleeting attraction. At some point, our eyes met, lingering longer than usual. She smiled, the corners of her eyes crinkling softly, a smile that carried warmth, affection, and a hint of playful acknowledgement. I felt my chest tighten with a mixture of relief and joy, realizing that she felt the same quiet fulfillment I did in our shared moments. Without words, we acknowledged the bridge we had built between us, a bond that was respectful, tender, and undeniably real. As the evening deepened, she rested her head lightly on my shoulder, a gesture so intimate and gentle it made the world shrink to the quiet space between us. I let my head lean slightly toward hers, careful, reverent, savoring the rhythm of her breathing and the subtle warmth radiating from her. It was a moment of complete trust, a small but profound declaration of our feelings without a single word. By the time the lanterns burned low and the night air cooled further, the warmth between us remained. We sat in companionable silence, hands still intertwined, hearts quietly aligned. There was no rush, no need for dramatic gestures, just the simple, profound acknowledgement of what had been growing all along, a slow-burn connection rooted in trust, understanding, and tender affection. In that quiet night, it became clear, what we had found in each other wasn't fleeting or forbidden, it was a subtle, lasting warmth, a promise of emotional closeness, and a beginning that felt both thrilling and safe. And for the first time, I realized that love didn't have to be loud to be profound, it could live in the quiet moments, in lingering glances, and in hands gently held.